Now, since we are going to be rendering some pretty pictures of this guitar, we are going to need the frets to be in place. Now, these frets are going to be purely cosmetic, because in the real world, clearly this is a stock component. It's wire that you hammer in and then you kind of file it down to match the shape of the fretboard. But in this case, you know, digitally, it's going to be nice to have it in there visually, but we don't have to make them perfect. So what I've done is I've created a component that's going to house all of our frets. We don't have to create each fret independently. We're going to do them all in one big part document. And in that part document, you can see I've already imported the master model, and I'm just showing the sketches that I think we're going to need, which is the dimensions of the frets, the locations of the frets, the shape of the fretboard, both horizontally and vertically, because as you recall, this fretboard is not flat. It's actually kind of bowed on two dimensions, meaning that we're going to have to make sure that our frets follow that, at least closely enough that we don't get any visual gaps. And satisfying all of those constraints is going to be a little bit tricky. I'm not going to lie. This is actually, I'm going to have to take some roundabout methods to get these in here. So this might seem like a little bit of a crazy process, but I have thought through it. I've tried a few different methods, and this is the best one that I've found. So first of all, we are going to need the outside edge of this fretboard, because remember I said we'd have to file these down to match. So just like with the nut, let's go ahead and edit this guy in context, and then in the Surfaces tab we'll do our offset trick, where we're going to offset just this outer surface by 0 millimeters and click OK. So we've got that surface imported into our file, which again is a bad idea in most cases, but in for our purposes, especially since this is just a cosmetic, you know, detail, not a big deal. Now let's go to our untrim surface tool, because that's going to get rid of all these little notches for us, and click OK. So now we're left with one big, nice, smooth surface to work with. And I'm going to use my Edge Extend tool to extend all of the edges of this out by about 4 millimeters, just so I've got some extra surface to play with here. Now, the rest of this is going to start to get a little bit crazy, okay? So there are two things we need to do in order to make this work. Well, three, actually. Three things we need to create in order to make this work. First of all, we're going to be sweeping this shape, this profile, along this path, and actually that's going to be fine. So we just keep this path visible to us. We are going to need fret positions, but the positions aren't linear. So we've defined these positions along a linear sketch, but in reality the top of this bows down. And if we were to just pattern this right along this existing sketch, then our frets right in the middle of the fretboard would be hovering above the fretboard because it's bowed. So we're going to have to actually do a little bit of legwork here, unfortunately. So here we go. Let's go to our right plane and start doing some of that legwork, which basically entails creating a bunch of points and then adding some constraints to those. So let's create one point for each of our fret positions all the way down this curve, and I'm making sure not to accidentally snap to anything that's going to hold them horizontal. I want them to be snapped to the profile curve, but not to any of these other points. Alright, once I have all of those points in the document, or at least in this sketch, I can take them and select their corresponding point from the master model and put a horizontal relationship between them. This is the most time-consuming and tedious part of this process, and unfortunately, I can't think of a better way to do this. You might be able to think of a better way, and by all means, tell me what it is. Once you figure that out, I want to know what you think is the best way to do this. Because unfortunately this is just a little bit tedious. Alright, now I've fully constrained all of those points, and they are right along the top edge of my fretboard, which is exactly what I want. So from here I should be able to hide these guys, get them out of the way. I don't think that we need them. There's one other thing that we need to do here, which is kind of weird. Let's go to my right plane, and I'm going to create a gigantic block that is bigger than everything else in here. and just extrude that out the opposite direction by some small amount. This is an unfortunate necessity because of the way patterning works in SOLIDWORKS. In order to be able to pattern my sweep effectively along all of these things, I don't want to do a geometry pattern. I actually want to do a feature pattern. But feature patterns only work if they're connected to a larger piece of geometry. So we're kind of playing the system here to make this work. Now let's do a swept boss. We're going to sweep this profile along this curve, and that's going to come out far enough. However, it won't be far enough down at the other end of the fretboard where it's wider. So what we'll have to do is go to our Direct Editing tab, Move Face, and then offset this front face out by, I don't know, let's just say 20 millimeters. So we got not 200, 20 millimeters. So we got plenty of extra to work with here. So we got lots of material there. And then we can go to our features, or pattern features that is. We'll do a sketch-driven pattern. We'll choose this new tedious sketch that we created, this guy right here. And under the features to pattern, we want that sweep and its corresponding move face feature. And finally, we want a reference point, and we need to select a reference point. And that's the point that's going to touch each of these points along the pattern. And that happens to be right here in the middle of this sketch. So we choose that, and that's going to put these all the way down just where we want them, right along that curved fretboard. Perfect. Now those should arc in both directions. They arc this way, they arc that way, which is exactly what we need. Now that all those are there, we don't need this big block anymore. So let's go to Cut with Surface. We'll cut with the right-hand plane. Make sure that arrow is pointing to the side we want to cut off. And keep all bodies when we're done with that. And we'll be left with just those frets in the spots where they need to be. We'll also do Cut with Surface, and we're going to cut with this surface. Make sure that we flip that so the arrow is pointing out the way we want. Click OK, and that's going to trim all those guys down for us. So that they match that outside edge of the fretboard. And then finally, we're going to want to mirror these guys across. So we'll go to our features, mirror bodies. We'll choose the right-hand plane, and finally mirror all of these bodies across. And once again, the tedium sets in. If you have I feel in my bones there must be a better way to do this, but at the moment I'm drawing a blank. So let me know if you can think of a better way, and I'm sure that we can come up with something elegant. Alright, so we'll make sure to check Merge Solids when we do that. Click OK, and we're left with all of our beautiful frets in place. In fact, let's just go through here and hide all of these sketches that we don't need. And we can close this, save it, and there we have it. Beautiful cosmetic frets on our fretboard, and they follow it pretty darn perfectly.